can't provide text that directly imitates the exact style of a living author. If you'd like, I can create an original script that captures some high-level characteristics often associated with that kind of communication. Psychology-focused, persuasive, analytical, observation-driven, and intense, without copying any specific writer's style. Most people misunderstand the empath. They imagine someone soft, someone fragile, someone who absorbs emotion and collapses under the weight of it. Picture a person who constantly gives, constantly forgives, constantly sacrifices. They imagine kindness without boundaries, sensitivity without strategy, compassion without power. And that's exactly why they never see the dangerous empath coming. Because the most dangerous empath isn't dangerous because they lack empathy. They're dangerous because they understand people. There is a massive difference. Most people walk through life looking at behavior. The dangerous empath looks underneath behavior. They don't just hear the words. They hear the motive behind the words. They don't just see the smile. They see the tension hiding behind it. They don't just notice confidence. They notice insecurity disguised as confidence. While everyone else is watching the performance, they're watching the mechanism. And that changes everything. The average person gets manipulated because they focus on what somebody says. The dangerous empath focuses on why they said it. The average person gets deceived because they evaluate the story. The dangerous empath evaluates the storyteller. That's why people often feel exposed around them. Not because the empath is judging them, because the empath is seeing them. And most people spend their entire lives trying not to be seen. Think about how much energy people invest in image management. They want to appear strong. They want to appear successful. They want to appear intelligent. They want to appear unbothered. Every conversation becomes a tiny performance. Every interaction becomes a negotiation of perception. Most people accept the performance at face value. The dangerous empath doesn't. They notice the micro-hesitation before the answer. They notice the emotional shift when a certain topic appears. They notice which stories are repeated and which stories are avoided. They notice where confidence suddenly disappears. They notice where anger appears too quickly. They notice where praise is desperately needed. And over time, these observations form a map. Not a map of behavior, a map of identity. That's when people begin feeling uncomfortable. Because very few things are more unsettling than realizing someone understands you better than you intended. The strange thing is that the dangerous empath rarely starts with power. Most begin with pain. Their perception was born from necessity. As children, they learned to read emotional weather because emotional weather determines survival. They learned to notice tone changes. They learned to notice tension. They learned to notice unpredictability. Some learned to read a room before entering it. Others learned to identify danger before danger announced itself. What looked like sensitivity was often adaptation. What looked like intuition was often years of observation compressed into instinct. They became experts without realizing they were studying. Every expression became data. Every silence became information. Every contradiction became a clue. And eventually, something remarkable happened. They stopped merely sensing emotions. They started predicting behavior. That's where people underestimate them. Prediction creates leverage. When you know what someone needs, you can predict what they will chase. When you know what someone fears, you can predict what they will avoid. When you know what someone hides, you can predict where they will become defensive. The dangerous empath doesn't need control. Control appears naturally because understanding creates influence. Notice something fascinating. The loudest person in a room often believes they are the most powerful. But power isn't measured by who speaks the most. Power is measured by who understands the most. A person shouting their intentions is easy to predict. A person quietly collecting information is not. That's why dangerous empaths are often underestimated. They're listening while others are performing. They're observing while others are competing. They're learning while others are proving. And learning compounds. Eventually, they possess something most people never develop. Clarity. Not perfect clarity. Human beings are too complex for perfection, but enough clarity to see patterns. Enough clarity to see emotional loops. Enough clarity to see motivations repeating themselves. Enough clarity to recognize that many adults are still being controlled by wounds they received decades ago. Once you see that, people stop appearing random. You begin recognizing scripts. You begin recognizing predictable reactions. You begin recognizing that most conflict isn't happening in the present moment. It's happening between old pain and current circumstances. The dangerous empath sees this instantly. Someone becomes angry. Others see anger. The empath sees humiliation hiding beneath it. Someone becomes arrogant. Others see confidence. The empath sees fear of inadequacy. Someone becomes controlling. Others see authority. The empath sees anxiety. Someone becomes distant. Others see coldness. The empath sees protection. This ability creates a strange paradox. The dangerous empath often understands people they don't even like. Maybe especially the people they don't like. Because understanding doesn't require agreement. It requires observation. And observation is their specialty. This is why manipulation rarely works on them for long. Manipulation depends upon blindness. It depends upon emotional distraction. It depends upon misdirection. The manipulator wants attention focused on one place while the truth remains somewhere else. But dangerous empaths naturally look behind the curtain. They instinctively search for incongruence. They compare words with behavior, behavior with emotion, emotion with timing, timing with intention. The pieces either fit or they don't. When they don't fit, suspicion appears. Not paranoia, pattern recognition. There's a difference. Paranoia invents threats. Pattern recognition identifies them. The dangerous empath becomes difficult to deceive because they are not evaluating isolated events. They are evaluating consistency. Consistency reveals everything. Anybody can fake kindness once. Anybody can fake confidence once. Anybody can fake sincerity once. Consistency is harder. Eventually the mask slips. Eventually pressure exposes character. Eventually stress reveals priorities. Eventually desire reveals motive, and the empath is waiting, not aggressively, not cynically, just patiently. Because time tells the truth faster than interrogation ever will. This patience becomes another source of power. Most people rush toward conclusions. Dangerous empath gathers information. Most people react. The dangerous empath watches. Most people demand answers. The dangerous empath lets behavior answer. That distinction matters. Because people reveal themselves when they think nobody is studying them. They reveal themselves in comfort. They reveal themselves in disappointment. They reveal themselves in success. They reveal themselves when they believe the moment doesn't matter. But every moment matters. Every moment leaks information. The dangerous empath knows this. That's why they often know exactly who someone is long before everyone else figures it out. Not because they possess magic, because they pay attention. Attention is a superpower in a distracted world. While others chase stimulation, the dangerous empath studies reality. And reality leaves clues everywhere. Watch someone's reaction to criticism. Watch someone's reaction to praise. Watch how they treat people who cannot benefit them. Watch what happens when they don't get their way. Watch what happens when nobody is watching. The answers are all there. Most people simply fail to notice. The dangerous empath notices, and once they notice enough, something interesting begins to happen. Their compassion evolves. At first, they feel responsible for everyone. Then they feel exhausted by everyone. Then they understand everyone. Then they become selective. This is the stage people rarely talk about. The dangerous empath is not endlessly available. In fact, mature empaths often become incredibly difficult to access. Not because they hate people, because they understand cost. They understand emotional investment. They understand energy. They understand reciprocity. They understand that compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. The younger empath believes every suffering person deserves unlimited access. The dangerous empath understands that suffering and accountability are separate issues. A person can be wounded and still harmful. A person can be hurting and still manipulative. A person can be struggling and still destructive. Understanding the wound does not require accepting the behavior. This realization changes everything, because now empathy stops being weakness, becomes discernment. And discernment is dangerous, especially to people who rely on emotional confusion. The manipulator wants guilt. The dangerous empath wants clarity. The manipulator wants urgency. The dangerous empath wants evidence. The manipulator wants emotional reactions. The dangerous empath wants patterns. Suddenly, the usual tactics stop working. Victim stories lose effectiveness. Charm loses effectiveness. Pressure loses effectiveness. Intimidation loses effectiveness. Because the empath is examining the structure underneath the performance. Structure becomes visible, illusion weakens. That's what makes them difficult opponents. Not aggression, perception. The most dangerous empath can sit quietly while somebody explains exactly who they are. The person talking believes they're controlling the conversation. The empath is building a psychological profile. Every word becomes another piece. Every emotional shift becomes another clue. Every contradiction becomes another marker, and eventually a moment arrives. A moment when the empath understands the person more deeply than the person understands themselves. That's when influence becomes possible. Not manipulation, influence. Because understanding creates precision. If you understand what drives someone, your communication changes. You know which words matter. You know which words don't. You know where resistance lives. You know where openness exists. You know where fear operates. You know where pride operates. And suddenly conversations become different. More effective, more direct, more accurate. People often describe this as intuition. Sometimes it is, but much of what looks like intuition is simply unconscious calculation. Thousands of observations processed beneath awareness, tiny signals becoming conclusions, patterns becoming predictions, predictions becoming certainty. The dangerous empath trusts this process because experience has validated it repeatedly. They've watched people reveal themselves too many times. They've watched hidden motives surface too many times. They've watched masks fall too many times. After enough repetitions, confidence develops. Not arrogance, confidence. It's confidence that comes from evidence. Yet this ability carries a burden, because seeing deeply means seeing pain everywhere. The dangerous empath notices loneliness hidden behind achievement. They notice fear hidden behind control. They notice grief hidden behind humor. They notice insecurity hidden behind perfectionism. They notice exhaustion hidden behind productivity. The world becomes difficult to simplify. Villains become more complicated. Heroes become more complicated. Everybody becomes more human. This creates emotional conflict. Because understanding often softens judgment, you see why people became who they became. You see the events that shaped them. You see the experiences that wounded them. You see the fears driving them, and suddenly hatred becomes harder. Not impossible, harder. The dangerous empath learns that understanding and boundaries must coexist. Otherwise, perception becomes a prison. Without boundaries, they carry everyone's burden. With boundaries, they carry wisdom instead. That distinction determines whether empathy becomes strength or weakness. The most dangerous empaths learn where responsibility ends. They understand something many people never learn. You can understand someone completely and still walk away. You can forgive someone and still leave. You can love someone and still refuse access. You can recognize pain without volunteering to become its victim. This knowledge changes the way they move through life. They're less reactive, less desperate, less controllable, because they no longer confuse empathy with obligation. And when obligation disappears, manipulation loses power. This is often the exact moment people begin calling them cold. Not because they've become cold, because they've become clear. People accustomed to unlimited access interpret boundaries as hostility. People accustomed to control interpret independence as rebellion. People accustomed to emotional leverage interpret self-respect as cruelty. The dangerous empath expects this. They understand projection. Understand that people often accuse others of violating expectations rather than violating principles, so they remain calm, not passive, calm. There is power in calmness, especially when others expect emotional chaos. A calm person is difficult to steer. A calm person is difficult to provoke. A calm person is difficult to manipulate. The dangerous empath knows this. Their calmness isn't accidental, it's strategic. Not strategy against others, strategy against confusion, because confusion creates mistakes, clarity creates options, and options create freedom. Freedom is the true source of their power, not emotional sensitivity. Freedom. Freedom from needing approval. Freedom from needing validation. Freedom from needing everyone to understand them. Freedom from emotional coercion. Freedom from guilt-based control. Once someone reaches this level, become extraordinarily difficult to dominate. You can pressure them, they'll observe. You can flatter them, they'll observe. You can threaten them, they'll observe. Observation remains constant, and observation eventually reveals motive. When motive becomes visible, influence weakens. This is why some people instinctively dislike dangerous empaths. Not because the empath has done anything wrong. Because unconscious people fear conscious observers. People protecting false identities dislike accurate mirrors. People hiding motives dislike perception. People managing appearances dislike authenticity. The empath becomes threatening simply by seeing. No attack is required. No confrontation is required. Awareness alone changes the dynamic. Imagine trying to run a deception while knowing someone in the room understands exactly what you're doing. The pressure becomes unbearable. Eventually, the deceiver either leaves or exposes themselves. The dangerous empath has seen this happen repeatedly, which is why they trust patience. Patience allows truth to emerge. Force often hides it. One of the greatest misconceptions about power is that power requires domination. Real power often looks like restraint. The dangerous empath understands this. They know things they never say. They notice things they never mention. They understand weaknesses they never exploit. Because possessing power and using power are different things. Anyone can attack vulnerability. Few people can recognize vulnerability and choose integrity. That choice defines character. Character defines the dangerous empath more than perception ever could. Without character, perception becomes manipulation. Without character, understanding becomes exploitation. Without character, insight becomes weaponry. But with character, insight becomes protection. Protection for themselves, protection for others, protection against illusion. The most dangerous empath isn't dangerous because they harm people. They're dangerous because they cannot easily be fooled. They are difficult to control because they understand control. They are difficult to deceive because they understand deception. They are difficult to manipulate because they understand manipulation. Their awareness creates resistance. Their perception creates independence. Independence creates a kind of quiet strength that many people never develop. You won't always notice them immediately. They may not be the loudest voice. They may not be the center of attention. They may not be seeking influence at all. But they're watching, learning, connecting dots, reading the emotional architecture hidden beneath human behavior. And while others are busy reacting to appearances, they are studying reality. One pattern, one contradiction, one observation at a time. Until the entire picture emerges, until motives become visible, until intentions become obvious, until the distance between what people say and what they actually are becomes impossible to ignore. In that moment, the dangerous empath possesses something rarer than charisma, stronger than intimidation, and more powerful than persuasion. Possess understanding. And understanding, when combined with discipline, patience, boundaries, emotional control, and relentless observation, becomes a force that quietly reshapes every interaction, every relationship, every negotiation, every conflict, every alliance, every decision, every opportunity, every challenge, every attempt at manipulation, every attempt at deception, every attempt at control. Because the person who truly understands human nature is rarely surprised by human behavior, rarely trapped by emotional theater, rarely distracted by appearances, and rarely convinced by performances that collapse the moment reality applies pressure.